It is the Rebel Instinct Podcast, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Galen Etlin, again with my VP of Marketing here at Act-On Software, Casey Monk. And Casey, I know we've got a friend here on the show today. I'm going to go through my spiel. Gessica Tortolano, Director of Slalom, a global technology consulting company with more than 13,000 team members and partnerships with companies like Microsoft, Salesforce, Snowflake, Tableau, so many more. And Gessica also has experience serving clients like Google, ESPN, Samsung, Carnival, Gap, Facebook, Burger King, Coca-Cola. The list goes on. She is an experienced design and user experience evangelist. Casey, talk about exciting.
She is that girl. So it's so good to see you, Gessica, after all of our years working together and all the fun times that we had as friends in Miami, many of which are not podcast appropriate. So we're going to keep it professional today. So obviously I know everything about you, or a lot about you, but tell our listeners a little bit about your passion for experience design and user experience and what inspired you on that path.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Thanks so much for inviting me. So my journey in user experience started really when the discipline first started out in the industry. I would say like back in the 90s. And you know, I've been doing this a while where this is starting to become the norm in companies and industry, where people need to understand what their users or their customers or their guests need and what they want, and even what their pain points are. Because once we understand that, we can make the experience better for them. So that's kind of like, you know, the buzzwords distilled down. That's what we do. We make better experiences for humans, not computers. And, you know, I've been doing this a long time, and I learn just as much as, you know, all of us do every year. Things change all the time. Between working at agencies and also teaching, I've taken that on to be the evangelist of, you know, good experiences out there.
And she's damn good at it too, y'all.
The reviews are in. Speaking of those, Gessica, you know, stalking your LinkedIn profile as a podcast host does, I did see reviews from people over and over talking about that passion that we're talking about, the spirit and joy that you bring to UX and UI education. What sort of trends in that space are you seeing that really get you excited?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's true. We over the time that I've been working in this career, I've seen different trends come up. And I would say that right now we're seeing a lot of trends in the vision space. So a lot of large companies that, you know, let's say they got, like, in quotes, online, maybe like 10 or 15 years ago, right? They had their first website or two, and now they're starting to look back and say, like, where am I going from here? Now that I have something out there, and maybe it's okay, you know, maybe it needs some revisions, but what's our North Star? So I'd say that a big trend is large, you know, enterprise companies looking to set a vision for the future of their digital, and not just digital, but their overall customer experience. So we're starting to see less of the division between digital and physical spaces. So if you think of a company like a cruise line or a car rental company, it isn't just the thing you do on the app. It's when you get there. It's when you drop the car off. It's when you check into your cruise. What is that like? So the trend is starting to move toward, let's think beyond just the product or the device, but the overall customer journey.
I think you gave some good examples, but anything else that companies or marketers are doing that is just really mixed up from a user experience that you're saying needs to end now?
Working in silos. So like a lot of companies are separated. They separate the customer journey. Their physical office spaces are literally separated. So if you think of a company, I'll just use an example, you know, before you buy a product, that group is in one building. After you buy the product, that group is in another building. And just foundationally or operationally, it's difficult to create a good experience when your own company is divided. So now put that on the customer or the user, and you start to see that there's divisions and it doesn't feel like a connected experience. And that's because it's not, even from within the organization.
Well, so you lived and worked in at least 17 cities around the world. For brands that are trying to be more global, is there a universal formula, or do we need to be thinking more culturally specific for user experience?
Yeah, absolutely the latter. So when you think of a global brand, and like I'll use, like we have a lot of local brands here, and I love to talk about them, but like a cruise line, or even a QSR, a quick service restaurant, like a Burger King, right? Both of them are global companies, like a Royal Caribbean or a Carnival. Their audiences or their customer base is completely different. In fact, even the experiences in, let's say, for example, a McDonald's or a Chick-fil-A or a Burger King here in America versus, like, let's say Holland. So when you go to Holland and you go to like a Burger King or a fast food chain, it's a much different experience than here. And same with the cruising industry. So like, it's really important that you don't just create a blanket solution for everyone. So just within one culture, you're going to have differences across your customer base. And then you bring it to another country, and then you have even more. And that's even just a country that maybe reads the same format that we do, right? Left to right. Whereas, like, think about if you go to an Arabic speaking country, now all your layouts are in reverse. And that's something to consider too. Even the use of iconography in illustrations, you have to be careful. It's just super important to know what the culture is, who the audience is, because, different symbols that maybe for us mean peace, somebody putting up the peace sign, it means something else. It might not be bad. It just means something else to another culture. So one, you want to make sure you're not offending anyone. But number two, you want to play on the strengths, so if going to eat at a McDonald's in Holland is like high end, that's a different way that you're going to treat that customer.
Great points. Although, I think there are some cross culture treats that like McDonald's should bring over from Japan. I was just noticing yesterday.
Amen.
They do these like little mini pancakes, and they have these packets with like butter and syrup together that you just squeeze. It's like, we need that over here.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's all like, learning from each other, I think, is the best thing that a company can do, is like,
Right.
whatever you're learning or what's happening over there, it's like, how can how do you take that learning, or even like things to improve on, maybe things that didn't work? How do you leverage that from different offices, different departments, and even different countries? But yeah, I love the idea of like an international brand, because you get to learn so much about just our world, even, and how
Yes.
people interact with it.
Oh, you're so smart. So true. I remember when I first got my job at Amadeus, which is a global company, my world just exploded because there were so many different cultures I was getting to interact with for the first time in my life. So great points.
Well, I know this is something that Casey has personally helped me with a lot. So I'm curious, Jessica, to get your perspective, coming from local news, being a news anchor, very buttoned up, kind of uptight and formal, to now trying to shift to be a little bit more human in our communication, if you will. What kind of advice do you give your clients and other leaders to be more rebellious in their marketing and leadership?
There are a lot of industry standards out there when it comes to, like, let's say, for example, design, or even the way you approach design. There's a lot of industry standard out there, but I would say, being rebellious would be like putting, I would say, your own spin on it. So I kind of, over my career, have collected, like, let's call them the greatest hits, and I've put them all together. And so one of the things that I would say might feel a little rebellious would be the way that I approach design. It's from like a very lean, scrappy, almost like going back to the early days where like we still print, you know, in some cases this is probably not a good rebellious because we're, you know, it's paper and paper comes from trees, but the idea is that we externalize our process. So if we print out our inspiration, we print out like what's happening, we call it the wall of awesome. And what it does is like when clients see everything like their own product all up on the wall and they look at, for example, if it's a cruise line, we might pull in something totally out of category, like an innovation around rental cars or a restaurant, something interesting that we saw in the restaurant space. And it's completely out of category. But what it allows them to do is kind of like, it's like pointillism. It like reveals themes when you can see it all up on the wall. And I would say it's rebellious because it doesn't fit within like a corporate way of doing things, like slides, right? Like they're used to, you give me a bunch of slides. I want to be wowed by the shiny end product. But this is more valuable, is to really just see almost the scrappiness, like the homework that goes behind it.
So Jessica, what's the most rebellious or outside of the box thing that you tried with your work, and how did it go?
Thinking about pushing a vision or a North Star, it's like, what does that mean to companies? And I would say that right now it feels rebellious because it puts companies maybe in an uncomfortable position where they have to think beyond just like how much money are we going to make this month, or how much money are we going to save next month. So it's a little bit uncomfortable, and I think that's why it's a little bit rebellious, is we're trying to think of like, you know, things like, what if the product could come to you, or the service could come to you and not you go to them. So like, let's take a rental car company for an example. We're so used to just the way it is. And I'd say rebelling is part of the innovation process, is like looking at disrupting what we know it to be right now. And that feels normal to me, but probably pretty rebellious to some of our clients, is to say like, what if the car just came to you? What if someone could deliver it to you? What if you could pick it up in your garage instead of going to the airport and waiting or wasting an hour and a half in line?
All right, so Jessica, how are you a rebel in your non-work life?
Ooh, I'm sure Casey has some stories about that too. Again,
I'll never
probably to share in a different podcast. But I tend to, I don't know, I guess just like not maybe make people feel uncomfortable, because that's not the best thing to do always, but it's like you pose questions, like whether it's at my daughter's school or at a store. I mean, unfortunately, I kind of live and breathe like experience design. So no matter where I am, I'm trying to improve some sort of experience. And so that's probably where I kind of get blended between my professional life and my personal life. I start to try to improve the world around me.
What did you feel at the store, Jessica?
I'll often give feedback about like the process of like checking out, or like the way that the physical space is set up. Like, oh no, you know, like Whole Foods just started to put in a bunch of self-checkout kiosks, but there's not enough space in between for like people to, you know, put their bags. And so like,
that's so annoying.
Yeah. And so it's just like those little things where I'm like, you know, this is like not the best experience. And so funny, I always try, and like, I'll be on with a customer service representative and I'm telling them how they should improve their website or their process of like returning an item. And it's like some call center person, but you know, even within our city, like, you know, like Casey, you lived in Miami, and it's like, how could we improve the city? And so like any moment I get, like if I'm at, you know, Bayfront, I'm talking to the guys, driving around in the golf cart, telling them what they should do to make this experience better for the citizens of Miami.
If you were president, I mean, come on, the world would be a better place. But no, I love that. I love that. And you do it in a way like you have a vibe that it's not like, can I speak to a manager kind of personality? It's always like, just comes with the wonderful sort of energy that you exude as a person. So I think that's why it works so well.
Well, and genuinely trying to improve an experience, not just for you, but for everybody. That's what you're thinking about, the
Exactly.
broader audience.
People.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
Well,
our world, right?
If we're looking at an example of maybe somebody else who's living your rebel dream, what rebel do you think in our culture needs to be celebrated and why?
There is a guy out there. His name is Luke W. Well, he goes by Luke W. In my field, his full name is Luke Robalewski, and it's W-R-O, Lewski. And he is someone that I always I feel like I've taken on his cause, and his cause is making forms easier to use online. And it sounds really maybe even boring a little bit, but if you've ever filled out a form online, whether it's desktop or especially mobile, have you ever started to fill out a form on your phone and you're like, no, I'm going to take this to the desktop or my laptop,
or just give up?
Yeah, or you just give up. And so lately what I found myself doing is looking for easier, because forms come into play when you check out or buy something. So if I want to buy something and I've never bought there before, I can already anticipate that it's going to take me a long time because I don't have all my information in there. So I've started to abandon any purchasing that doesn't use Apple Pay or allow me to just quickly check out. So Luke W., he wrote a white paper I think it was before the mobile device even came on the scene. And it was 2008, and it's called Forms Best Practices. And he took a look at eye tracking, heat mapping, and it found some really interesting, fascinating, best practices that have started to become really industry standard, and mobile has actually supported his view back then before mobile really existed. So I'd say he's kind of like my rebel guy. I don't really know him, but I follow him around on Twitter, and he's fascinating. He works for Google. He'll go back and show you screenshots of the way Google Maps used to look when it first came out. And you may not even notice that shift, but then you start to see each screenshot, you're like, oh, we used to use that? That really evolved.
That's cool. It's actually, marketers deal with forums a lot because, we have our gated content, which I sometimes just wish we could get rid of that whole experience overall and just let the content be free. So Jessica, now it's time for our Honey, I Don't Think So segment, talking about what needs to stop now in marketing or the MarTech space. So what's been annoying you lately, Jessica? Are you ready for your Honey, I Don't Think So?
Centered text. It's what? So alignment is a really important thing when you read anywhere online or in, out in the physical world. It's how do you left alignment? It just allows you to be able to because people don't really read everything anymore. They scan. And so when you left align things, it's easier to scan. It's easier for your brain to process and say, can I actually consume this content? So I would say, 1 or 2 words centered on a slide is okay, but everything else, I would say, please stop centering your everything on every presentation.
I love it. That is just sheer magic, that things you wouldn't even think about, but it's that makes sense. That makes a heck of a lot of sense. Well, Jessica, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute delight to catch up, and let's catch up offline as well.
Thank you so much, Casey and Galen. This is awesome. Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks everyone for listening to the Rebel Instinct podcast. Be sure to follow Act On Software for updates and upcoming episodes. And remember to always act on your Rebel Instinct. Until next time.